Of the FBI's work product that led to the decision not to charge Hillary Clinton with a crime. All set to be released in coming days. This is Special Report. Good evening, welcome to Washington. I'm Brett Baer. When the head of the FBI said he would not recommend charges against Hillary Clinton over her email scandal, there were a lot of questions. Now the public will see some of the raw FBI notes that led to that decision. Portions of the FBI report of its investigation will be released very soon, possibly in a day. And tonight, we have confirmation that at least some of the thousands of emails deleted and not turned over to the State Department dealt with the issue of Benghazi, Libya. Clearly not falling into the category of personal emails. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harris joins us now with new developments. Catherine.
Well, thank you, Brett. Hillary Clinton has said consistently that she turned over all her government emails, but tonight the State Department is confirming about 30 records that may be related to the 2012 terrorist attack are among the thousands recovered by the FBI from Clinton's server. The department is working to confirm the exact number and whether any are duplicates, and already posted online as more records from the FBI become public.
Law enforcement sources say portions of the FBI's investigation into Hillary Clinton's email practices could be released as early as this week, possibly Wednesday, but emphasized the review is ongoing. President Obama's spokesman said the White House is not involved.
I've seen those reports. I can tell you that the White House did not consult with the FBI about that decision or any of the other decisions that they've made in terms of handling some of the investigative material.
After FBI Director James Comey's July statement where he recommended against criminal charges,
we are expressing to justice our view that no charges are appropriate in this case.
Media outlets filed Freedom of Information Act requests with the Bureau, forcing the public release. The expectation is that the redacted files will likely include the FBI's recommendation to the Justice Department against criminal charges, the summary of Clinton's FBI interview known as a 302, as well as the backup notes from agents who questioned her. While the FBI director said there was no evidence of criminal intent by Clinton and her team to move classified information outside secure government computer networks, Republicans who read the FBI files sent to Congress earlier this month claim agents never pressed Clinton.
He said he didn't go forward with charges because she didn't have specific criminal intent. I didn't see any questions on that. She said she did it for convenience, but I didn't see the follow-up questions in the interview I read.
Today, the Clinton campaign welcomed the files' release. And before the news became public, the FBI director was speaking at a cybersecurity conference where he joked about avoiding more discussion of the closed national security investigation.
I'd like to take your questions, and I'm hoping you're going to think up a question that has nothing to do with Secretary Clinton's emails.
Then the FBI director addressed increasingly aggressive foreign hackers who are targeting political committees and voter registration databases.
We take very seriously any effort by any actor, including nation states, maybe especially nation states, that moves beyond the collection of information about our country and that offers the prospect of an effort to influence the conduct of affairs in our country, whether that's an election or something else.
Today, two more Democrats joined Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid, calling on the FBI to investigate alleged connections between the Trump campaign and Russian interests and whether that relationship contributed to attacks on the Democratic Party websites, Brad.
And Catherine, we've been following this Judicial Watch lawsuit that
right.
They didn't get a deposition under oath with Hillary Clinton, but they did. The judge said that she had to answer questions via email, and today Judicial Watch basically provided those questions.
That's right. Judicial Watch released the 25 questions that they put to Mrs. Clinton. Several are multi-part questions, and you can see from the questions that in some cases Judicial Watch appears to already know the answer, but they want that get into the permanent court record, and she has until September 29th. And of course, she's got a debate before then to prepare for.
The 26th.
Yeah.
Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
Iran's pattern of disrespect and defiance since it signed a nuclear agreement with the U.S. and its allies is growing more pronounced, and the potential for something to go seriously wrong has increased dramatically, according to U.S. officials. On the high seas, especially. Chief Washington Correspondent James Rosen has tonight's report.
Iranian push WPB. After a week in which Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps vessels harassed the destroyer USS Nitsa and USS Squall had to fire 50 caliber machine guns to brush back another Iranian vessel, Pentagon sources told Fox News the regime has already provoked more naval confrontations this year than in all of 2015.
It's significant particularly because it shows that post the nuclear deal in the summer of 2015, not only did Iran's behavior internationally not get better, having been able to take advantage of the deal, it's gotten worse.
In a Pentagon briefing, U.S. Army General Joseph Votel, commander of U.S. Central Command, saw nothing terribly amiss.
While we saw some activity here in the last couple weeks, that's not particularly new. We've seen that over time. I would say that we haven't seen a significant change in their behavior.
The regime has also conducted at least 4 ballistic missile tests since the nuclear deal was finalized, and on Sunday, state-run TV broadcast images of Fordo, site of a decommissioned uranium enrichment complex, and the deployment there of the S-300, an air defense system manufactured and sold by Russia. Again, senior U.S. officials downplayed it.
It's not prohibited under any UN Security Council resolution because it's a defensive system. That doesn't mean we don't have concerns with any increased Iranian military capability, and we've expressed those concerns.
Secretary of State Kerry raised hopes last year the nuclear deal would lead Iran to dial back its regional aggression.
I know that a Middle East that is on fire is going to be more manageable with this deal and opens more potential for us to be able to try to deal with those fires.
Analysts say Iran's escalations could relate to the nuclear deal or could reflect internal political dynamics, and that President Obama and his aides are now grappling with tough choices they made at the nuclear negotiating table.
I don't think the administration is trying to explain away things it didn't expect. I think the administration is explaining things that it had previously discounted as not being consequential, which the rest of the world is second-guessing and saying, is that really okay for the Iranians to do?
General Votel was more demonstrative in his praise of U.S. sailors than he was in criticizing Iran, saying U.S. naval forces were measured in their response to Tehran's provocations and had thereby helped to avert an international incident. Brett.
On this with the panel. James, thank you. Now to the 2016 presidential campaign. The GOP nominee, Donald Trump, is looking to close the gap with Hillary Clinton in the polls, trying to consolidate Republican support and to reach out to traditionally Democratic groups like African-American voters. Chief political correspondent Carl Cameron is traveling with the Trump campaign and reports tonight from Everett, Washington. Good evening, Carl.
Hi, Brett. For the most part, he's out here in California and Washington to fundraise today, but tomorrow there's a very important speech on immigration in Phoenix, Arizona. And Trump has a great deal of work to do. For the past 3.5 weeks, he has been perceived as sort of going back and forth on the 3 key cores of his immigration proposal. 1, the ban on new Muslim visitors and immigrants. Now it's supposed to be extreme vetting. 2, what to do about the wall. He said it would be from the Pacific coast to the Gulf Coast. It would be a great wall, but now he's acknowledged that, well, there are mountains in places that make a wall impractical, and perhaps it would have to be technology instead. And then there's what to do about the 11 million undocumented aliens in the country now, whether the illegal immigrants need to be all deported, or whether, as he suggested to Sean Hannity a couple of weeks ago, there would be a softening of that. Those things, we're told, will be answered to some degree tomorrow, and depending on where he goes with those folks who may not choose to self-deport, in other words, go back to their home nations before coming back and reapplying for citizenship in this country, if they're not rounded up, an awful lot of Republican-based voters might consider that amnesty. On the other hand, if he were to soften, that might make it more possible for Donald Trump to court the kind of swing and independent voters that often decide general election presidential campaigns, Brett.
Carl, on another front, I mentioned it in the lead there, Trump is reaching out to African-American voters, heading to Detroit this weekend, planning for a speech there.
Yeah, that's the second big speech of the week, and there's an awful lot riding on it. His outreach, his attempt to appeal to minorities, African Americans specifically, as well as Latinos and Hispanics, rather, has been quite pronounced in the last month. And there will be a meeting on Saturday in Detroit at the only African American owned and operated evangelical TV network. It's in part being organized by Pastor Mark Burns, who's in a bit of a hot water, having retweeted a picture of Hillary Clinton in blackface and suggesting in that tweet that Hillary Hillary Clinton is in some way taking advantage of black voters, and once she gets their votes, she'll forget about them for another 4 years. There was a bit of a backlash. Pastor Burns has apologized for what he acknowledges to some was an offensive retweet of that picture of Clinton in blackface, but not for his sentiment that she is essentially exploiting African-American votes for political gain and doesn't really care about them. That speech on Saturday in addressing those evangelical African-American leaders will be a big opportunity and a big test for Trump yet again. Brett?
Carl, thank you. I'm hosting the O'Reilly Factor tonight, and Kellyanne Conway, campaign manager, will be on with me then. Tune in. Like a student cramming for a big exam, Hillary Clinton is said to be engaging in extreme measures as she prepares for her first debate with Donald Trump. Meanwhile, the Democratic candidate is facing a new complication in her effort to divert attention from the evolving scandal involving her interaction with the Clinton Foundation. Senior political correspondent Mike Emanuel has that story tonight from Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
There is growing pressure on the Democratic nominee to detach herself from the Clinton Foundation. This time it is coming from an unlikely source, the New York Times editorial page, which published today, quote, "Achieving true distance from the foundation is not only necessary to ensure its effectiveness, it is an ethical imperative for Mrs. Clinton. The foundation continues taking heat for the cozy relationship and frequent contact between then senior State Department official Huma Abedin and former top foundation executive Doug Band. And with new details about Clinton's emails surfacing daily, it is a cause for alarm among many Democrats and Clinton supporters. Abedin is also in the headlines again due to new sexting allegations involving her husband, disgraced former Democratic Congressman Anthony Weiner. Abedin announced just yesterday she has decided to separate from him.
Secretary Hillary Clinton.
Fox has confirmed with a Democratic source outside the campaign that the Clinton team is seeking insight into Donald Trump's deepest insecurities, looking at ways for Clinton to get under his skin during the first presidential debate. That effort includes consulting with psychologists and the co-author of Trump's book, Art of the Deal, Tony Schwartz. The Democratic source notes the campaign has at least 25 researchers digging into 4 decades of Trump's background, looking for ways to fluster him. An example is when Senator Marco Rubio made this reference back in February to Trump's hands, taking him off his game.
You know what they say about men with small hands? You can't trust them.
Clinton continues fundraising in the New York area, but her running mate, Tim Kaine, is making several stops in battleground Pennsylvania, suggesting it is time for Trump to come clean.
The Trump campaign just feels like Trump's next big con. His next big con. He's hiding his tax return. He's hiding his financial bill of health.
The new Monmouth poll of likely voters in the Keystone State has Clinton with an 8-point lead over Trump, with Libertarian Gary Johnson at 6% and Green Party candidate Jill Stein at 1%.
A solid lead at this stage, but with Trump believed to be connecting with white working class voters, the Clinton team does not want to take any chances of allowing battleground Pennsylvania from slipping away. Brett?
Mike Emanuel traveling with the Clinton campaign in Lancaster. Mike, thanks. A leading Democratic Political Action Committee is canceling ad buys in the Ohio Senate race. The Senate Majority PAC has already spent roughly $10 million to support former Governor Ted Strickland's attempt to unseat Republican incumbent Rob Portman. But the group has pulled the plug on a new set of ads set to run next month, presumably over poor poll numbers for Strickland. The Washington Post reports the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee is also pulling back on its ad buys for Strickland. This is primary day in Florida and Arizona, 2 key battlegrounds in the Democratic Party effort to retake control of the U.S. Senate. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Jonathan Hunt's in Tempe, Arizona. He looks at a major challenge, primary challenge to Senator John McCain. But we begin with correspondent Phil Keating in Miami, where Democrats are picking a challenger to incumbent Marco Rubio and deciding what to do about their high-profile but damaged congressional representative. Good evening, Phil.
Good evening, Brett. In most of Florida, that's just about 45 minutes left until the polls close. Up in the Panhandle on Central Time, they'll have an extra hour beyond that. Rainy day today didn't help turnout too much on what is historically a 20% voter primary turnout day in Florida.
Primary day in Florida features a couple of races getting national attention and out-of-state money. Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz is in the biggest Democratic primary challenge of her political career, coming on the heels of the leaked email scandal at the Democratic National Committee, which substantiated Bernie Sanders' claim that the DNC was biased against him. She's endorsed by Hillary Clinton, while law professor Tim Canova is backed by Sanders, making for a proxy rematch. Canova thinks Wasserman Schultz is vulnerable, especially after having to resign from her DNC chairmanship during the Democratic National Convention.
We don't take any money from any corporate interests, none of their PACs or super PACs, and it leaves us free to represent the people. I like to say I'm bought and paid for by the people.
They want to know they have a fighter, and they want to know that it's someone that knows their way of life, that has been in the community, which like I have for 30 years.
Congressman Patrick Murphy is facing off against Congressman Alan Grayson in the Democratic primary for Florida Senate seat, currently held by Republican Marco Rubio. Grayson's been the subject of ethics investigations, and party leaders urged him to drop out. Murphy's been accused of embellishing his resume and job experience. This morning, Rubio refused to say whether he agrees with Donald Trump that Clinton is a bigot.
I think Hillary Clinton has a lot of problems. I think she's corrupt, she's dishonest. I do think some of the policies she stands for do harm minority communities, absolutely.
It's too far to call her a bigot, though.
Well, again, I'm not, you have to ask other campaigns about the terms they use.
Shocked, as a lot of people I spoke with were shocked about the support that Marco Rubio has given to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is perhaps the most racist, bigoted person to ever make it this far.
Polls show both Murphy and Rubio should comfortably win tonight. In fact, for the past 2 weeks, both men have been looking past today's primary day, attacking and campaigning against each other. The latest Quinnipiac poll showing a Murphy-Rubio November matchup with Rubio up 3 points, but that's within the margin of error. So it's going to be close, competitive, and costly. Now let's go live to Tempe, Arizona. My colleague Jonathan Hunt, who is covering the Senator John McCain campaign.
Senator John McCain voted in his own Republican primary today, facing what he says is perhaps, quote, the race of my life. His first hurdle, winning the Republican nomination against an opponent, Kelly Ward, who has run to painting Donald Trump, while McCain attempts to make the top of the ticket a non-issue whenever it's brought up. Would a Donald Trump endorsement help or hurt you?
I don't think it has much effect either way because, as I say, I've been representing the people of Arizona for many, many years, and they judge me on me and my record.
Ward, a 47-year-old former state senator, has also made age an issue, appearing to suggest McCain, who turned 80 on Monday, might die in office. She told the website Politico last week, quote, I'm a doctor. The life expectancy of the American male is not 86, it's less. And she told us today, quote, after 4 decades in D.C., it's time to honor John McCain's 80th birthday with retirement. Still, McCain is expected to win the nomination today, but then the real fight begins.
I'm confident of victory. You always expect a tough fight. I think anybody who doesn't is foolish, but I'm confident. It's always been a tough fight, every one I've been in.
The Democratic candidate, Ann Kirkpatrick, has made it clear that whether he likes it or not, she intends to make Donald Trump an issue for the senator.
It's unbelievable to me that Trump can say such hateful, racist, insulting things, and John McCain still supports him.
Senator McCain's impatience over the number of questions he gets about Donald Trump is obvious. He walked away from our interview, in fact, when we asked a second Trump question.
I gotta go.
But with the Republican presidential candidate here tomorrow to deliver his major immigration speech, Senator McCain seemingly cannot escape the shadow of the top of the Republican ticket. His re-election bid may simply come down to whether the McCain brand can trump Trump. Brett?
Jonathan, thank you. Jonathan and Phil with reports on the Senate primaries. Maine's Republican governor is not saying for sure whether he will resign. Paul LePage has been under fire since he left a profane voice message for a Democratic state lawmaker over an accusation of racism. LePage has apologized and says he wants to meet the lawmaker personally with him. This afternoon, the governor tweeted, regarding rumors of resignation. To paraphrase Mark Twain, the reports of my political demise are greatly exaggerated. Up next, President Obama's legacy on the American judicial system is much greater than you probably know. We'll have that. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. KHON in Honolulu as the National Weather Service issues a hurricane warning for Hawaii's Big Island. Category 3 Hurricane Madeline is approaching. It could be the first major hurricane to make landfall there in that state in decades. Fox 45 in Baltimore with the indictments of 14 retailers accused of more than $16 million in food stamp fraud. All of the defendants were arrested this morning. Law enforcement officers also executed 26 federal search warrants and seized 46 bank accounts. And this is a live look at Sacramento, California from our affiliate Fox 40. One of the big stories there tonight, the state assembly unanimously approving a bill making prison time mandatory for anyone convicted of sexually assaulting a person who is unconscious or too intoxicated to consent. The measure is a response to a 6-month jail sentence for a Stanford University swimmer who sexually assaulted an unconscious woman in 2014, according to police. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. One of the big issues in the presidential campaign, of course, is the future of the U.S. Supreme Court. The winner may be in position to shape the direction of the court for generations. But Chief Legal Correspondent Shannon Bream reports President Obama has already left his mark on courts that may have much more effect on your life.
It's often overlooked, but the nominees to the lower courts in the United States are often one of the most important legacies that a president leaves behind.
And in President Obama's case, the hundreds of federal judges he's added to the lower courts are already having a concrete impact. The Fourth Circuit, which sits just one level below the U.S. Supreme Court and is headquartered in Richmond, Virginia, is a prime example. Previously viewed as one of the most conservative appellate courts in the country, it has drifted significantly to the left, with Democrat appointees now outnumbering their Republican counterparts 2-1. That circuit not only recently struck down North Carolina's voter ID law, but also ruled in favor of a transgender student seeking to use high school bathroom facilities matching the student's gender identity rather than biological gender, a trend that worries conservatives.
The Supreme Court takes very few cases, so there's not an opportunity for them to correct every error that's made. And when you have activist judges throughout the lower levels of the federal judiciary, that can have a very damaging effect on the American system and the rule of law.
The president has successfully seated a total of 329 federal judges during his 2 terms, all of them lifetime appointments. When he took office, only 3 appellate courts had more democratically appointed judges than Republican appointees. Now, 9 of the 13 circuits do. The U.S. Supreme Court hears only 70 to 80 cases a year, making the lower courts even more important as they handle hundreds of thousands of cases each year, often representing the final word on critical issues. And it's not just the cases they decide, it's how they decide them, crafting the framework for how legal disputes will be handled going forward.
President Obama's nominees to the Supreme Court in particular will be a legacy for him, not just because they might cast more liberal votes than justices that a conservative president would have put on, but also because the way that they talk about the law, the way they talk about the Constitution.
President Obama also worked to remake the D.C. Circuit by forcing through, with the help of then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, 3 nominees. Reid changed the rules of the Senate in order to make that happen. One of the key issues that circuit considers, the use of executive power. Brett.
Shannon, one of the president's nominees who remains stalled is Judge Merrick Garland, of course nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court. There's news today that the GOP may actually change course and give him a hearing.
Well, what GOP Senator Chuck Grassley, who chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee, said on Monday was this: if Hillary Clinton wins the November election, it's possible the Senate could actually move on Garland's nomination, but only if a, quote, large number of senators pressed Grassley to do so. Brett.
We'll follow that. Shannon, thank you. The Justice Department says it provided the Supreme Court with erroneous information that helped it win a case upholding a blanket policy of denying bail to immigrants jailed while appealing deportation orders. A follow-up case is scheduled before the court in its next term. This is the second such instance of this administration giving the court bad information in 4 years. Now to immigration. As Carl Cameron mentioned, Donald Trump is set to give a major speech tomorrow, clarifying a policy that was a foundation of his primary victory. So how does Trump compare to President Obama on the issue of immigration reform? You might be surprised. Tonight, correspondent Kevin Corke takes a look from the White House.
On day one, I'm going to begin swiftly removing criminal, illegal immigrants from this country.
If his previous statements are a guide at all, Donald Trump's major speech on immigration Wednesday could turn out to be surprisingly similar to President Obama's position on the topic.
We have a lot of bad people that have to get out of this country. We're going to get them out.
That was Trump last week. This was the president in 2014.
And that's why we're going to keep focusing enforcement resources on actual threats to our security. Felons, not families.
Both men say ridding the country of criminal illegal immigrants is a top priority, and both propose spending more on border security. And though Trump's constant call for a massive wall along the U.S.-Mexico border is not supported by the president, both men have been proponents of adding so-called virtual border security. White House officials today brushed back the notion that their approaches have much in common.
Is that really far afield from what Donald Trump is basically saying? If they're a criminal, they're going to be out of here?
I guess it depends on the day you ask.
Indeed, Trump's statements on illegal immigration have run the gamut. He once supported deportation forces, but has since softened his tone, favoring a more nuanced handling of those here illegally. Even the president's had a tough time finding his footing on the issue, assailed by some advocacy groups for being the deporter-in-chief. The Obama administration has deported more than the sum of all the U.S. presidents of the 20th century, 2.5 million and counting, including last year when 91% were said to have had criminal records. Conservatives have long accused the administration of cooking the books, inflating the number of deportees, and analysts say there's a good reason for that.
Nobody believes that the political class, from the president on down, will actually enforce the immigration laws in the future any better than they've been enforced in the past.
And that really is the rub in this issue. Now, Brett, you may be interested. What's Hillary Clinton's policy on fighting illegal immigration? Well, her policy essentially mirrors that of the president, which is to say she'd like to keep the focus on deporting dangerous criminals and terrorists. Brett?
Although May issue more executive orders.
That's right.
To keep others here. Kevin, late this afternoon, the president continued to offer prison commutations to scores of convicted felons. What can you tell us about that?
Boy, big numbers too, my friend. 111 commutations by the president. That's on top of the 214 he granted earlier this month. And all told, Brett, that's 673 commutations. That's more than the 10 previous U.S. presidents combined. Brett?
Kevin Corke, live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. Secretary of State John Kerry is blaming the media for covering terrorism. Kerry made the statement during a speech in Bangladesh yesterday, saying, quote, "If you decide one day you're going to be a terrorist and you're willing to kill yourself, you can go out and kill some people, you can make some noise. Perhaps the media would do us all a service if they didn't cover it quite as much. People wouldn't know what's going on." More on this quote with the panel. The Middle East Media Research Network is citing ISIS reports stating that the terror group's spokesman, Abu Muhammad al-Anaini, was killed on the ground in Aleppo, Syria. The news is expected to generate a ripple of reactions, including threats for retaliation from ISIS and its supporters. No definitive word from the Defense Department if that in fact is true. Now to the human toll, though, of the ISIS reign of terror. Tonight we're getting a shocking glimpse, actually, of this ongoing atrocity. Correspondent John Huddy reports from our Middle East newsroom.
The stories and the images are haunting. Skulls, bones, decomposed bodies. ISIS executed thousands of people, bulldozing their bodies into ravines, ditches, or wherever else they could dump them. An Associated Press investigation documented 72 mass graves in Iraq and Syria, with the bodies of anywhere from 5,200 to 15,000 people. 6 burial sites are on Sinjar Mountain, outside ISIS's de facto capital of Mosul in Iraq. It's where more than 100 bodies were found. This man was one of the few survivors. He saw relatives, neighbors, and friends lined up and gunned down, some shot in the head while begging for their lives.
They kept the men here.
Many of them were handcuffed there. After that, they started taking them over there in group and executed them. They shot them. I could see this from my house.
ISIS captured Sinjar in early August 2014 and immediately started the genocide of the Yazidis. Last year, with help from U.S. Special Forces, Kurdish Peshmerga fighters recaptured Sinjar. That's when they started finding the bodies stacked up in long ravines and bulldozed over. Stephen Wood, CEO of All Source Analysis, described the size and scope of the graves.
This image was taken about a month after the alleged event occurred with the massacre itself. Same ravine. Again, this is now about 190 meters here and about 15 meters wide, where we can see earth that has been pushed up.
That's more than 600 feet long and 50 feet wide. While the massacres continued, many young women were taken as sex slaves, according to survivor accounts and various human rights groups. The fate of many still unknown. Officials say that 16 other mass graves have been located, but they're in areas too dangerous to go into and excavate because of the ongoing violence and the threat of ISIS. Brett?
John Huddy in our Middle East newsroom. John, thank you. The European Union wants to take a big bite out of Apple. It has ordered Ireland to collect $14.5 billion in back taxes from the company. Both Apple and the Irish government are appealing. The EU says Apple received illegal state aid. The Obama administration says the ruling could undermine foreign investment. Stocks were down today. The Dow lost 49. The S&P 500 gave back 4. The Nasdaq fell 9. A company in Luxembourg will be the first to use a recycled rocket from SpaceX to send up one of its own satellites. It's the same satellite operator that was the first to use SpaceX in 2013. SpaceX says it can save considerable time and money by reusing the 15-story booster rockets, which are now designed to land back on Earth instead of falling into the ocean. Scientists operating a radio telescope in Russia say they detected a strong signal in the direction of a star, 95 light years from Earth. The astronomy website CentauriDreams.org reports researchers are calling for a permanent monitoring of this target. The star is known to have at least one planet. The website states, while no one is claiming the signal is from an alien civilization, it does merit, quote, further study. Donald Trump prepares to tell us what he really thinks about immigration. There's a lot at stake, of course. We'll talk about all of it, as well as the Clinton revelations on the email scandal when we come back with the panel.
We turned over everything that was work-related, every single thing. Personal stuff, we did not. I had no obligation to do so and did not. And all I can tell you is that I turned over every work-related email in my possession. What we turned over were more than 30,000 emails that I assumed were already in the government system, Brett, because they were sent to state.gov addresses.
Sure, but there were some that were just recently discovered and turned over.
No, that was in the State Department, not in me.
Okay.
I've turned over everything. My emails are so boring.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm embarrassed about that. They're so boring. And so we've already released, I don't know, 30,000 plus. So what's a few more?
What's a few more? Well, there are many more, thousands more, and they're dealing with things that are clearly not personal, including Benghazi and the Clinton Foundation. And we are finding this out day after day. This, as the New York Times, usually a clear supporter of a Democratic candidate, especially in this case, writes this editorial from the editorial board about the ties to the Clinton Foundation. When Mrs. Clinton became Secretary of State, the Obama administration tried to draw a line between the foundation, particularly its foreign government sponsors, and her role. The new emails underscore that this effort was at best partly successful. The Clinton Foundation has become a symbol of the Clintons' laudable ambitions, but also of their tangled alliances and operational opacity. If Mrs. Clinton wins, it could prove a target for her political adversaries. Achieving true distance from the foundation is not only necessary to ensure its effectiveness, it is an ethical imperative for Mrs. Clinton. So with that, we'll bring in the panel. Jonah Goldberg, senior editor at National Review. A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics. And Cheryl Atkinson, anchor of Sinclair's Full Measure. Jonah, okay, so, you listen to that tape, and one after another, I turned everything over.
Yeah, well, if you go back and you go to her initial press conference at the UN, she had this granite facade of a cover story. And the facts that have come out since then have not only just pounded it to rubble, they've ground it into like a fine paste. There's literally not a single factual assertion she made since back then that hasn't been proven to be a demonstrable lie. And the amazing thing, I mean, at some point you'd think she'd just want to fire her lawyers, because they were the ones who said that they'd gone through everything with a fine-tooth comb, they read every individual email. Turns out all of that wasn't true either. You know, the one thing that I haven't been able to find are any emails about yoga. You would think that, like, if there were all these tens of thousands of emails that were deleted that were about yoga, some of those might have surfaced. But no, it's only the ones about Benghazi, the foundation, and all these things. If she wins, this will haunt her administration far worse than Whitewater ever did her husband's.
And, you know, people overlook the fact that there was testimony here under oath to Congress in which she said some of these very things that have demonstrably proven to be false.
Right. Jonah's right. So many things she said a year ago, but even that day, that Benghazi testimony in the 11 hours last October, she said, I remember that day, she said something, the State Department captured between 90 and 95% of her emails, and the State Department had to come out the next week and say that they didn't know where that number came from, that wasn't true. She has obviously brought this on herself. I think what she probably thought was legalese that would protect her were actually a bunch of lies. They've all been proven wrong. Now it's not just another shoe to drop, it's raining shoes, and Democrats are terrified about what's going to be coming out this week and the end of September in the days and weeks before the election.
And it seems like the Benghazi emails are especially egregious because they're so, you know, after all this investigation into Benghazi, to hear that there are at least 30, maybe more Benghazi emails.
Well, and I filed a Freedom of Information Act request for those in 2012. Still hasn't been filled. It's been, what, 4 years? Those should be coming to me, but they're not. So that's yet another example of violation of Freedom of Information law at the very least. I also think that, you know, when she's talking about separating herself from the Clinton Foundation, just to bridge over there for just a moment, if the New York Times is right and there really are these troubled entanglements, how does a separation now really solve that problem if she were to become president? The question is, that's water under the bridge where she's already taken money from through the foundation from domestic and foreign interests that she will be making decisions about if she's president of the United States, and I'm not sure how logical it is to say a separation now would even solve that.
Is it significant, Jonah, that the New York Times editorial board is out with this, you got to break free of this thing because it's hurting, you're going to screw this whole thing up?
Yeah, no, I think it is significant, and that's one of the reasons that made me think of Whitewater, is that people forget, New York Times sort of led on Whitewater in the early part of the first Clinton administration. This is the kind of issue that the New York Times is sort of genetically incapable of ignoring, this sort of pay-for-play, behind-the-scenes access selling, and I think what they're warning her is, look, you know, we think you're going to win, but if you don't drop this, we're going to hound you to death on this, and it's a sign of how every Democrat I talk to says they're just terrified about what more is going to come out, because Hillary clearly seemed to think that these emails wouldn't be coming out.
And the Chelsea still staying at the head almost kind of rubs it in some people's faces.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Democrats are on the record, along with all these editorial boards across the country, saying you absolutely have to shutter it or just merge it into another foundation so that the work can be, the donations can be collected somewhere else, the work can be done somewhere else, detached from the Clinton family, at least for 4 or 8 years. And then they announced right after that, oh, even though they're going to stop taking foreign and corporate donations when she's president, they should stop taking them now. But Chelsea's going to stay, and actually the Clinton Health Access Initiative, their biggest project, will still be taking foreign money.
Yeah, there's a question of what a separation really would mean. You know, you could say you're separated, but what does that mean? But I think the public, they're counting on the public to have this tired, weary feeling, the drip about the emails and the Clinton Foundation. Who's paying that close attention besides us and people maybe watching this show? But I would say the vast majority of people aren't in that deep, and they just hear it and they sort of tune it out. And I think they're counting on that.
All right, I want to turn quickly to the Trump campaign and the speech coming up tomorrow on immigration. Here is Jason Miller, a spokesperson for Donald Trump.
What you've seen with Mr. Trump is he's been remarkably consistent in his pledge to end illegal immigration. We're going to build a wall. We're going to secure our borders. We're going to enforce our immigration laws. We're going to end sanctuary cities. We're going to pass E-Verify. We're going to uphold the Constitution. That's going to make a big difference in this country.
I guess there's just a lot of people, Jonah, who have seen an evolution, and the Trump campaign itself says, wait till the speech.
Yeah, and we should. Let's wait till the speech. I mean, earlier this week, we heard some trial balloons that it may not actually be a real wall. It may be a digital or virtual wall, which sounds even more Jeb Bush-like. Maybe the Mexicans will pay for this hologram. Who knows? I think that the problem, the gamble they're making is that the base isn't going to leave him for anything, and he needs a lot more than his base. And this is essentially what my colleague Ramesh Ponnuru calls a ricochet pander, where he's trying to sound nicer on things like immigration and minorities in order to attract essentially more college-educated whites, particularly college-educated women.
Cheryl, Monmouth, Pennsylvania poll out today. Clinton with 48% to 40% in the four-way race. Other state polls seem to be tightening a bit. Some national polls tightening as well. But the trend is that Clinton has a bit of a lead, but it may be softer than it once was after the convention.
And I agree with Jonah. Obviously, the Trump campaign is looking to see where it can pick up some new voters with appeal to minorities, with discussion maybe softening the immigration stance. And I agree with you when you said, even if he softens on immigration, the people that want him to be tighter aren't going to go vote for Hillary Clinton. So the question is whether they lose their enthusiasm and don't come out and vote at all, because that's where he stands to really surprise the projections and confound all the polls even. If there's a huge turnout of non-voters, and by that I mean people that haven't voted in a long time, normally don't vote, but are so enthused that they might come out to vote, and that this wouldn't show up in the polls ahead of time, will those people be discouraged?
Next up, Russian hacking and Iran provoking.
By any actor, including nation states, maybe especially nation states, that moves beyond the collection of information about our country and that offers the prospect of an effort to influence the conduct of affairs in our country, whether that's an election or something else.
What I see is this is principally the regime leadership trying to exert their influence and authority in the region, and they are trying to do it in provocative ways that are unsafe, unprofessional, and really, I think, work against their objectives in the long term here.
The FBI director talking there about hackers, Russian hackers believed to be trying to get in somehow to the election system here in the U.S. And General Votel talking about Iran and its provocations in recent days. Back with the panel. Cheryl, in the days after the nuclear deal, Secretary Kerry said that the Middle East that is on fire is going to be more manageable after the nuclear deal, because of the nuclear deal, than before, and it opens up more opportunity to deal with a tough region. It doesn't seem that that's happened at all. If in fact it seems almost opposite.
I would say it seems as though they're more powerful and more aggressive, and we helped, and that it was both predictable and predicted by experts who said this would be the case. Now, the Obama administration, of course, says in the long run we're going to be much safer because of the deal, but a lot of people thought that wasn't the case, and all these provocations, I think if you ask the ordinary American, they would say makes them feel, if anything, less safe, certainly not more safe.
AB, the red flares you're hearing from the FBI director from inside the administration about the election and Russia, I mean, it seems real.
It's so frightening, and Director Comey's repeated assertion that it's taken very seriously is no comfort to us that either the federal government or the state governments have any ability to protect against this and to handle it and to fix it or mitigate the threat by Election Day. He just kept telling us in those remarks that it was just very, very concerning, and they take these things very seriously. This is truly a frightening prospect. It obviously would make sense that it would be a goal, and experts say that hackers have the ability, it's just whether or not they'll use the ability to do that on Election Day.
John.
Yeah, it almost doesn't matter whether they actually hack the elections. All they need to do is sow doubt. That is something that Vladimir Putin learned a long time ago from the KGB. He wants to create an image that NATO is weakening and divided. He doesn't actually have to divide NATO, just create the image. Same thing with elections. We remember with Bush in 2000, all the conspiracy theories about the Diebold machines and all of that. We have Donald Trump saying if he loses in certain states that it's proof that it's rigged. Now we have Harry Reid basically playing the same game, saying that it's proof the Russians hacked. And the Russians don't have to do anything. They're just laughing their butts off because they've already succeeded in undermining faith and confidence in the central institution of our country.
So you point to the Reid letter. He sends a letter to the FBI director. It says, I've recently become concerned that the threat of the Russian government tampering in our presidential election is more extensive than widely known and may include the intent to falsify official election results. Senator Reid going on, the evidence of a direct connection between the Russian government and Donald Trump's presidential campaign continues to mount. It's critical for the Federal Bureau of Investigation to use every resource available to investigate this matter thoroughly in a timely fashion. The American people deserve to have a full understanding, he goes on to say, of a complete investigation by November. I mean, tying the campaign directly to Russia and these efforts.
Well, you know me, I'm a little suspicious when public officials come out and talk about secrets, because it means they want us to know what can we really do about that. Why did they make this announcement? I wonder if there is a move to cast that kind of doubt so that on either side, they've done the same thing, so that no matter what the results are, people will wonder if the results are legitimate. I worry just as much about internal tampering. There are domestic hackers and people with access to the data that could also tamper it, and that's been a concern of experts as well. So I think that too is a concern.
More with the panel. One quick topic after the break. We want to get in this with the panel. Secretary of State John Kerry in Bangladesh speaking about terrorism, saying this, quote, no country is immune from terrorism. It's easy to terrorize. Government and law enforcement have to be correct 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But if you decide one day you're going to be a terrorist, you're willing to kill yourself, you can go out and kill some people, you can make some noise. Perhaps the media would do us all a service if they didn't cover it quite as much. People wouldn't know what's going on. We're back with the panel. Quickly, Cheryl.
I think he meant they would do us all a service, meaning us in the administration that have to answer all those questions.
AB.
I think he needs to watch the jet lag. I know he's working very hard. He needs some rest.
But I mean,
that final sentence was really something else.
Do you think that that's really the thought? Like the media shouldn't cover these things as much as they do?
What I think is that they do get frustrated.
I have heard President Obama say that we give too much time and credence and
that we could die in car wrecks at a faster rate and that type of thing, and they want context and perspective given. But he literally said then they wouldn't know in the final sentence, and it's embarrassing.
Yeah, I think Cheryl's interpretation is exactly right. It was a bit of a Freudian slip. He was saying, yeah, it would help us a lot. And evidence of that is, we have these confrontations in the Straits of Hormuz. We have this stuff about the Russians hacking our election, possibly hacking our elections. And President Obama announced today that he's going to be the guest editor of Wired magazine because, some priorities you just can't put off. I mean, it's really, you can't make it up.
All right, panel, thank you. Cheryl, thanks for being here. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That is it for this special report, Fair, Balanced, and Unafraid. Tune in about 1 hour and 30 seconds. I'm hosting for Bill O'Reilly on The O'Reilly Factor. We have Kellyanne Conway, the Trump campaign manager, on. You want to check that out. Greta goes on the record right now.